I do not have opening remarks. I'll see if my co-chair representing the treasurer's office has any opening remarks.
No, I do not, other than good morning and look forward to a productive meeting.
All right, we always start with a public comment period. Public is invited to offer comments about the work of the MARB. Before you make your comments, please be recognized by the chair. We'd ask you to limit your comments due to the time constraints of our meeting. Hasn't been a problem to date, I've noticed. Is there anyone present or online member of the public who wants to make comments? Anybody out there, Julian? Public comment period is open. Anyone care to make any comments? No one in the room? No one online? Going once? All right, Julie, you got your laptop up. You can see if people have their hands up, right? Things like that. Okay. All right, well, then we'll move on from the public comment period. We've got next on the agenda is approval of the minutes from September 8, 2022 regular meeting. I assume that the minutes were distributed as part of your materials and people have had a chance to review those. They did spell my name correctly, so I'm okay with the minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the regular meeting. Moved by Mr. Egan, seconded by Mr. Brockman. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Oh, Mr. White is going to abstain. We'll move on to item number 4 on the agenda, the City of Hartford, which is a review and discussion of their monthly financials. The monthly report was provided in your meeting materials. City is present, and I see the mayor is on the screen to provide an overview of the status of their year-to-date budget.
Good morning. Thanks, Mr. Secretary, and my apologies for not being there in person. I'm in my my COVID isolation room for the next few days, but it's good to be with you. You have the report in your packet, as you mentioned, and the short summary is that at this point in the fiscal year, still just as one quarter down and reporting on the first 2 periods, we're reporting everything at budget. We're not projecting any variances at this point. There are a few things that we're watching closely. One, our tax collections actually came in quite strong in the beginning of this fiscal year, so we're going to be watching to see if that strong performance holds in the next billing cycle in January, but our collections were about $5.2 million over FY22. We also have had a pretty positive license and permit fee income in the first 2 months, but again, we'll see how that smooths out as the year goes on. The other, other expenses we're projecting at budget. We're looking closely at our healthcare claims, which we discussed last time around. At this point, we seem to still be continuing the favorable trend, but we're watching closely there. We do anticipate that we will probably have higher legal bills than budgeted because of the ongoing center plan litigation. And our relocation line is one that we're watching closely.
I don't know. I'm listening to this stupid thing. I could tell you that.
Yeah, if you're online, please mute your microphone if you're not speaking so that we can hear the speaker. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. That concludes my report. We're going to keep close eye on the relocation line. We're trying to get that line to a place where it is a revolving fund that is self-sustaining as we collect from landlords and property owners after the fact. But this is the line from which we pay relocation costs after fires, for example. But again, at this point, our projections remain at budget.
Questions from the board for the city on their monthly financials? Staff okay?
I have one question.
One question from Ms. Kennison.
Under the municipal aid where it says the car supplemental, if I look year over year, last year you had received $11 million and to date you hadn't received it in August. Are you anticipating that would come through in maybe September, just a little delay, or is there a reason for that?
I think that Secretary Beckham might be in a better position to answer that question than we are.
Sorry, Secretary. He's laughing at me. Forgive me.
Yeah, that's money we send them, so we don't need to ask them that question. They'll get it when they get it.
Got it. I'm a financial gal. I don't hold the money.
And
If I may,
ironically,
we
I'm
did-
not, but whatever.
If I may,
Go
we
ahead.
did receive that money in September.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Leanne.
If you would indulge me just a second, we're starting to build the state budget at the moment. So I'm becoming more interested in certain items. Could I get a high-level summary of what SID number 420 Development Services pays for? It's 6.2 million for FY23.
Leanne, can you remind me what that code
It's on
refers to?
page 5. It's Development Services. 420 is the SID number, or the whatever that's what we call it at the state level. It says Development Services, it's 6.2 for the year.
So
It's the departmental budget, Mayor.
yeah, I
for
believe that's our entire Department of Development Services departmental budget. That includes everything from license and inspection to housing inspection to economic development to planning and zoning. It has quite a broad portfolio.
And the one under that for 5.4, Health and Human Services. Just a high level. What do you guys do with the?
That's our Department of Public Health. So that, of course,
Okay.
housed all of our pandemic response, but on an ongoing basis, it includes many different responsibilities, including health inspections, rodent control, administration of the Hvac clinics, administration of senior centers, and all public health functions.
The Hvac clinics, is that in conjunction with DSS? Does DSS have a role with you?
Yes, I mean, we administer them.
Okay. And the line up above, Metro Hartford Innovation Services, SID 122, it's 4.3 million for the year. What does that do?
MHIS is our combined IT function that is shared between the Board of Ed and the city. So that's all information technology, including support desk.
Thank you. Other questions? Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, thank you. I don't, do we have anyone from the Board of Education on the line? Okay, yeah, so my question.
I am here, Ashley, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Penn. So my question is regarding your COVID relief money. The ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 grants are obviously, sizable amounts of money. And your report indicates that that you think you're now on a track to spend the funding by the deadlines of 2023 and 2024, respectively. My question really is about the sustainability and how are you dealing with the potential cliff, I guess, fiscal cliff that you could be facing when those funds are no longer available.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate that. And fiscal sustainability is something that I, as this district CFO and a lot of other urban district CFOs, are concerned about. What I would tell you is there is a lot of money that's being spent in those grants designed around academic recovery, the social and emotional learning of our students, the safe reopening of schools. There were things that addressed all those issues. And I would say we've transitioned into a mode now where we're measuring efficacy of those programs to see, okay, what's really providing a lift? And of that, what do we want to continue post the end of September 24? And it's going to require our ability to then step back and say, okay, if we want to keep these things, what do we need to do differently? In other words, is there a way that we restructure our whole budget in a way that accommodates that going forward? And I mean, not just the general fund budget, but even the way that we incorporate our grants into that as well. But yeah, sustainability is a big piece of what we look at as we approve these expenses going forward. Of course, some of it is short-term in nature, but we do anticipate that there are programs that we're going to want to continue going forward. And that sustainability becomes part of my work that was kicked off here shortly after I arrived on taking a look at long-term fiscal sustainability for the district. And I think I may have shared at some point in the past year that that's not just an expense-driven issue. It's also a way of trying to unlock new revenue sources for us going forward that we have not pursued yet. But yes, sustainability is kind of first and foremost when we think about these things, is that we know that there's a finite limit or a finite timeline, I guess I should say, on our ability to spend that money.
Okay, thank you. I guess the only thing I'd add is, to the extent that you can fund one-time expenses, certainly that is one strategy that I would recommend, because I do think for not only Hartford, but for many school districts, when those funds go away, it is going to be a big issue for school districts around the state. So,
Correct. I agree with you.
I'm sure we'll hear about it at the state level at some point. We have the
Secretary,
same
if I
challenges at the state level on a number of items. Mr. Waxenberg has a question.
To follow up on Tom's question, I noticed that well over 50% is for personnel services for the ESSER money, which is a concern, obviously, when the money goes away and dries up. The other issue is, has the school board, or I don't think it would be within the mayor's purview, examined any of this money for facility upgrades? We hear a great deal about facilities being way in need of upgrading, and some of this money for one-time expenditures can be used to upgrade those facilities. Has the school board or has the administration designated, or are they going to designate any of this money? Because you still have millions of dollars unexpended. So the question is any of this going to be earmarked for ventilation projects or any other capital projects that schools may need because of the previous underfunding as a one-time expenditure?
Mr. Chairman, okay if I respond?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So let me address something with respect to the personnel costs. One of the things that we have budgeted in terms of our expenditures there is also retention and recruitment strategies that are more one-time in nature. As you know, we've had teacher shortages here in Hartford. We're not unique in that respect versus other urban districts or other districts in the state. So while that does reflect a cost that flows up under personnel costs, those are also one-time in nature. And then to answer your question about HVAC, yes, HVAC upgrades were something that were certainly budgeted within the scope of the ESSER funds. There's at least two projects that I can think of that are in scope within those funds worth, I want to say, somewhere around $2.5 million, perhaps a little bit more than that, at two different schools that had significant upgrade needs. One of which I know is already in the RFP process, and we're looking to award that work in the not too distant future. And then some of the more ongoing work around ventilation would include more frequent change out of the filtering systems that we have. Obviously, the filters that support those HVACs were being changed more regularly during the COVID period than they would have been perhaps, where standards would have been 6 months, and now we're looking at like 3 as an example. So yes, there is several $1 million that are tied to HVAC within that spending plan as well.
Thank you. Other questions of the board for the city on their monthly financials? All right, we will move to item 4B, review and discussion of a labor contract involving the Hartford Police Union. Labor contract between the City of Hartford and the Hartford Police Union covers the term July 1, 22 through June 30, 25. Approximately 480 city positions are covered by this union, although not all are filled at any given time, as our materials demonstrate. We have a tentative agreement that was reached earlier this year but was rejected by the union. This agreement is a result of the city and the union resuming negotiations. If the board chooses to take action on this contract, it has until October 26th to either approve or reject the agreement. And I understand we have representatives of the city here to describe this contract. You want to summarize who we are? Or the mayor?
Mr. Secretary, I'm happy to
Certainly.
lead off just with context. As you know, we had reached a TA earlier in the year that was voted down. That prior TA was discussed in subcommittee, but was never brought to the full board, I don't believe. This TA differs in some respects that we're happy to walk through, but just want to provide the broader context, which is, as you know, last year we negotiated an off-cycle increase for police officers at the officer rank only, meaning not including detectives, sergeants, lieutenants, captains, et cetera, as an important step to address retention challenges that are being faced by many urban police departments. One of the objectives in this contract was to reestablish appropriate pay differentials between the officer ranks and the higher ranks to ensure that there was appropriate incentive for continuing to promote and move up, as well as staying generally competitive with our pay. So one of the things achieved in this contract is the establishment of those, what we believe are appropriate pay differentials between ranks, and then what we believe are fair and appropriate GWIs, given both the labor market dynamics and the importance of recruiting and retaining officers, while at the same time making sure that we stay focused on long-term fiscal sustainability. I think that you have the summary of the TA in front of you. I do want to stress that this is the TA simply addresses those terms in the underlying collective bargaining agreement that will be changed. So there's, of course, a larger contract, but the TA document that you see is what was agreed upon between the city and the union as changes to be made to that underlying CBA. One of the most significant differences between the earlier TA and this one is that the earlier one included a change to the pension age eligibility, which would have dropped eligibility down to age from age 55 to 50 as an important part of recruitment efforts. The feedback that we got coming after that was that it was more important to members of the police force to see higher GWIs now rather than to make that change in pension eligibility. And that's the fundamental trade-off that we made, which we think is a reasonable and responsive one. And again, since the objective is to respond to the labor market dynamics and focused on recruitment and retention, we wanted to make sure that we did that effectively.
Questions from the board for the city on this contract? Mr. Brockman.
Can just a clarifying question. You may have mentioned in the opening. Has the union voted to approve the contract at this point, and the city council has approved it as well?
The union has. It is before the city council now.
Okay. And when does the city council expect? Like, is there a timeline on?
They have an upcoming meeting this Monday, but I can't tell you whether or not they will vote on it. They have a 45-day window in which to act after it's submitted by the city to the council. I can't recall off the top of my head the date it was submitted, although I think that either Attorney Lombardi or Chief Thode may have that date.
So they would have to act on it either at their October 11th meeting, which is coming up, or their October 24th meeting. So they have 2 meetings within the time period that they can act and still be timely.
And if they don't act, it is deemed approved.
So it was submitted to the board. I'm looking at Julian to confirm that I'm not about to say anything incorrect. It was submitted to the board this month, which started our clock. It's a tentative agreement. And we are approving it in advance of the city council's action. Presumably, if the city council were to make changes, it wouldn't be, we're approving what's in front of us. That's what's approved. If they make changes, that would not be approved.
Mr. Secretary, if I could just weigh in, the city council is not in a position to make changes. It's an up or down vote.
All right. That's good clarification. So I don't know. We haven't done too many of these, and I'm new at this. So
this is not, if I could, I'm so sorry. And I think there's a lag, so I don't mean to interrupt you.
Yep.
I don't think this is atypical for a timing consideration by the MARB. We often submit as soon as we've reached a TA, and I think a number of contracts have been reviewed prior to final adoption by council.
Okay.
And obviously, you know, if for some reason the MARB were to disapprove this, it may be beneficial to know that prior to council action. But I certainly hope that the MARB would not, because we think this is both a reasonable, fair, and responsible contract.
Yep. I was just thinking about the statute and approval of contracts, and I guess tentative agreements we're happy to say that's a contract that's in front of the MARB for approval, and this will suffice for approval of this contract. Although it won't go into effect until the city council. If they were to shoot it down, they'd have to renegotiate and bring it back to us, is what I'm saying.
If they were to shoot it down, Mr. Secretary, it would go to arbitration.
Okay. We would still need to approve it under the statute.
That's
if it
correct.
changed, I assume.
That's
Okay.
correct. But the mechanism by which it would change would be as a result of the arbitration process.
Okay. I'm clear. Questions? Mr. Egan?
Mayor, is there any impact as far as pension contributions from the city due to the, I think it's about 21 million in wage and step increases over the 4 years?
I apologize. I'm having difficulty hearing.
Okay, sorry.
Maybe somebody on my team could answer.
Is there any changes in contributions regarding the pension fund due to the approximately, I think it's about 21 million in wages and step increases over 4 years?
The only changes would result from the changes in wages. There are no changes in the percentage contribution. It would just be a function of wages paid.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions of the board for the city? Mr. Hamilton?
Yes, thank you. A few questions, Mr. Mayor. The wage increases here coming up to 3% in year 3 and year 4, plus the steps are, considerably higher than I think we've generally seen, here in Hartford and really around the state. And I'm just wondering, in terms of how much of that do you attribute to the fact that you had multiple zeros in the contract prior, and perhaps this group of employees fell behind some of their peers in other police departments around the state, and how much of it would you attribute to the fact that we've now got inflation that's running at about 8%, which is obviously a big change for sort of the macroeconomic environment that we're now operating in. So I'm trying to, and maybe this is really with respect to other jurisdictions as much as Hartford, but it would also apply to your other bargaining groups, whether you think that you're now setting a new standard as to what wage growth is going to look like over the next several years, or whether this is something really unique to this particular bargaining group and this particular situation.
So there's a lot there. I'll do my best to answer all parts of it, and if I leave something out, please feel free to ask me to address it. You are correct that these are higher GWIs than we have brought in in other contracts to the MARB. Respectfully, though, I don't think you're correct about statewide. I think this is pretty in line with what you're seeing in a lot of CBAs statewide. I do think that the reason that we believe this is the right and responsible contract to put forward is tied to a number of the things that you mentioned. Number one, the fact that our police union, like other unions, agreed to multiple years of zeros, 4 years of zeros in prior contract as we dealt with our fiscal crisis and insolvency. There is also the fact that the pandemic and the events during the pandemic led to a uniquely challenging recruitment and retention environment for cities, in particular urban centers across the state and across the country when it comes to police forces. And it is vitally important that we recruit and retain the officers that we have. I would not say that this is a direct response to inflation, but what I would say is that as you're in an inflationary environment, you're likely to see and have seen other municipalities make moves on GWIs, and we have to be sensitive to our competitiveness in that labor market. To your broader question about whether it's setting a precedent, I think the answer is no. We have to address each of these contracts individually. We have to look both at history as well as our ability to effectively recruit and retain. We are participants in a competitive labor market, and we have to be responsive both to our fiscal capacity and to the basic labor market dynamics. And I think there are some unique challenges when it comes to police nationally and statewide.
Okay, I've got a couple of follow-up or a couple of additional questions. And perhaps this one is for OPM staff as much as anyone else, but in terms of the 5-year plan, did the 5-year plan incorporate this level of wage increase? I'm thinking perhaps not, although I don't really know for a fact. And if not, I assume that when the plan is next updated, it would incorporate the latest contracts.
So I'll let Leanne weigh in on the details on that, but it will require some updating to incorporate larger general wage increases than were contemplated in the plan.
If I could, and Leanne, please correct me if I'm wrong or add any additional information. The 5-year plan, our budget and the 5-year plan that were submitted along with our budget included the projected cost of the prior TA. And while the costs are not identical, they are roughly similar when you weigh the elimination of the change in pension eligibility age against the higher GWIs. So you're correct that there will require some updating, but I don't think it will be dramatically different from the last 5-year projection.
Okay, great. And a couple additional questions on pensions. I didn't get a chance to read through the entire contract. It looks like you didn't make any changes here, but can you tell me what the pension is based on in terms of salary? Is it based on base salary or total W-2 earnings, or what's the calculation based on for pension?
There are different tiers of employees, but Attorney Lombardi, could you address the specific question?
As the mayor said, there are various tiers, but basically it's based on their salary at retirement. And then the percentage multiplier is different among the tiers, and it varies depending on the number of years of service.
But is the pension, is the salary based on base salary or base salary plus overtime?
Tom, the answer to that depends on the
duty, or
Tom, the answer to that depends on the tier in which employees fall. So employees, the most senior employees are still in a pension system that factors. We may have a few who are still in the tier in which all pay is factored into pension. After that, it is salary and overtime. But what's I think most important is that after the contract, the prior contract that we negotiated, there is a cap as a percentage of salary, how much of pension ultimate pension payout can be, which I believe is 80% of base salary.
That's
okay,
correct.
Thank you. So it sounds like there's some kind of, well, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Okay. And retiree health insurance, can you just, you have a little box in your write-up that says there's no change here, but it looks like, is it accurate that employees hired after December 2017 don't have any retiree health insurance, or is that only the pre-Medicare? Or I'm just unclear what the current provision is.
New hires do not have retiree health insurance. They get a stipend,
Okay,
a self-funded stipend.
gotcha. Okay, thanks. I guess one final question, and that is, did Hartford provide any sort of pandemic premium pay or hazard pay to any of your employees, whether police or fire employees or any other employees?
We provided a one-time $500 payment at the end of the fiscal year 21.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Mayor Bronin. You indicated that the agreement before us does not lower the minimum retirement age. What is the minimum retirement age for officers?
Again, it depends on the tier, but for most of our officers at this point, it is 25 years of service and age 55.
Mr. Waxenberg?
Couple of things. One of the board's concerns, obviously, is the Opeb liability, and the mayor's aware of that since we've been meeting, and the need for the city to start designating some of its, hopefully, future surpluses towards the liability. And because it's good to note that you're limiting that liability through tiering the benefit for new hires. But I would just mention that it's still a liability that's out there. It's significant. And my understanding from OPM is that this contract does not increase the OPEB liability. And if it does, it's minimal, but still it's an issue that needs to be addressed, I guess, through the administrative part, not necessarily through collective bargaining. But I just thought that we mentioned that because oftentimes the tiering of systems is necessary, not only for future fiscal, but for present liabilities as well. The second thing, I guess, is what I find interesting and I find heartening is at present, there are 4 steps. The present contract has a 4-step within the patrolman and all the other classifications, and you're moving to a flat 1-step schedule for the future so that in effect you do not have steps moving forward. You just have a salary for patrolmen, for captains, for whatever the other classifications are. So you've eliminated the steps within the contract. Is that correct?
We have for the ranks that are listed here, police officer on special assignment, sergeant, lieutenant, and captain, there are still steps for officer, police officer.
And how many steps are there? Do you, off the top of your head, do you have any?
5 altogether.
Okay, but okay. I find that heartening only because steps cause continued expenditures of dollars, and when you have less steps, you expend less money, and you can redirect that money towards a general wage increase, which could also enhance the recruitment aspect of your force. But I wish that people would look at that as more of an opportunity to do that throughout the state, and I congratulate you on that move. I think it's a very smart move to do.
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you. Among the materials provided was a summary of the savings, and under the pension section, there are blanks for the fiscal impact for each of the years. Was that intentional? Or is this information, will it be forthcoming with the next valuation? Just curious.
So the savings under this TA compared to the May TA on the pension side, there are 0 savings at this time because they negotiated out the change in the age for the pension benefit. So on the May TA, it included the costs associated with decreasing the age from 55 to 50 years of service. So since that clause went away, there's no cost associated with the pension. So that's what that line was speaking specifically to.
Ms. Shaw, there would be some cost, but as noted before, it would be solely a function of wages and GWI. No
Correct.
changes to pension formula or eligibility. I'm sorry, I was not able to hear that question if it was directed at me.
So just for purposes of clarity, where there is no change, it's explicitly indicated in this summary chart. And where there is zero impact, it looks like it's zeroed out. But for the pension column, there's just no information at all. So if it is in fact zero, a net impact, then the summary chart should just be modified to reflect that. Thank you.
Other questions, comments from the board concerning this contract? I guess we will take a vote then. If that's your pleasure, do you want to wait on this, or looking at the board? Ready to vote? People want to vote? All right.
I'll move to accept.
Mr. Waxenberg moves,
Mhm.
seconded by Mr. Egan. Any further? We won't discuss it further unless you want to. Go ahead. I assume we're approving.
Yes, accept, approve.
Does that work for you, Julian? Okay. This is a motion for the Municipal Accountability Review Board to approve the contract between the City of Hartford and their police union, the substance of which is in your materials. And it's been seconded by Mr. Brockman. I'm sorry, by Mr. Egan. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. We'll move on to the next item, which is that's the next city, I think. Thank you very much to the City of Hartford. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope you and everyone in the household is okay, or we'll get better soon.
Thanks very much.
All right. Take care. We have item 5 on our agenda, City of West Haven Subcommittee update. We had a written update memo from Mr. Freund in your materials. Julian, you want to give us a high-level summary of the subcommittee's actions or discussions?
We met on the 20th of September and received the first detailed update on the status of the 21 audit. And were provided some detailed information on the status of the checklist from the auditor and what was outstanding, and were told that most of the remaining opens would have been closed within the week, and that the audit is still on track to be completed by the end of November. Again, this is the FY21 audit. So looking at having that wrapped up by the end of November. We looked at one labor contract, which was reviewed by the subcommittee for the Board of Education administrators. And that item is on this agenda as well for this morning. But the subcommittee voted to recommend approval of that contract. We got a first look at the city's initiative to prepare what is now probably the most significant outstanding component of the 5-year plan, which is their budget mitigation plan. And so they shared with the subcommittee first look at where the largest opportunities are on the expenditure side for savings and on the revenue side for some enhancements, and gave us a short list of some of the mitigation measures that they're considering. And that's obviously going to be an ongoing process and should continue to evolve over several years, similar in approach to what the City of Hartford has provided for about a year or so. And then we discussed some aspects of the 2 firefighter agreements that are still unresolved right now. In the firefighters contract, which came before the board in September, the board opted not to take action, looking for more clarity on how the SAFER grant and the impact or the requirement for increasing minimum staffing would play out, whether that would be a permanent change, how much discretion the city would continue to have, and things of that nature. So we did get some clarity on that, which was that the grant agreement, if the grant were awarded, would be the document or the instrument that would require the city to go from a minimum manpower of 5 to 6 per shift. And that if that were the case, the language in the firefighter's contract would essentially be moot. There would be no need to specify that in the contract as well. And that the city would always have the discretion to go higher on manpower if it so choose, but that it did not need to be incorporated into the contract. So the subcommittee's advice was to go back and negotiate removing that language or dealing with it in such a way as to not have that built in as a contractual requirement, and let the grant agreement, which would also need to come before the board for approval, let the grant agreement address that. They also discussed the hazard pay stipend, which was the subject of an MOU that was approved, or that was presented to the MARB last month also. And with the board or the subcommittee expressing concerns over whether that sets a precedent or creates a liability when negotiating with other bargaining units, and looking for some examples of other municipalities that have allocated their ARPA in similar ways. We did not look at anything new on the brewery development agreement. I believe that agreement is still being drafted, and that was essentially the content of our September meeting. We meet again on the 18th.
Any subcommittee members want to comment, or Mr. Egan?
Just for clarification, if I recall correctly, at our last full meeting, and I think the brewery agreement, at least in theory, was before us, and we passed on it because we didn't actually have the agreement. And if I recall correctly, Mr. Tiernan stated that the agreement was drafted and he just had a second set of eyes doing a review on it. That's a month ago. Have we gotten the drafted but not yet final agreement?
Not yet. Not yet.
So is there a reason why, if in theory that the agreement's drafted and it's just kind of being reviewed by people who may have a little more time in covering these types of agreements, why we wouldn't be able to take a look? Because I would imagine, unless there's some issues with it, that any changes wouldn't be substantive as far as what the city already has proposed. Well, I guess I'll ask that to Mr. Tiernan since he's sitting here.
Mr. Tiernan, would you care to respond?
Oh, I'm sorry. To exploring other options, considering the appeals of the Zoning Board of Appeals decision and the Planning and Zoning decision. So I'll be meeting with them along with the mayor tomorrow. So when we send you an agreement, we want it to be a one-time review. We didn't want to send you an agreement and then have to come back with changes to that agreement. So that we're discussing the same topic more than once. So you will get the agreement, I'm sure, once we get an understanding of exactly the direction that the developer wants to go, because appeals can take a long time. We're confident we can win an appeal, but if there's a way to expedite development, the developer may want to take that course and make some changes. We'd incorporate those changes, then bring them back to this board.
Thank you to the chair, Mr. Brockman, who brought up the fact that we didn't have the agreement in front of us. It was somewhat prescient, I guess, for what's before us today.
Any other discussion of the subcommittee report that Julian just gave us and where we are with the subcommittee and those matters? We obviously have several matters for the city in a few minutes. Mr. Waxenberg.
Just some clarification for the city. On the SAFER grant, I know Hartford has for a single, in their firefighters, for a single house, it's 4 people. You have an officer, 2 firefighters, and a driver. That's for a single house. Looking at Allentown, there appears to be no consistency as to the personnel associated with the amount of houses, engines, things of that nature. What I need to know from the city is, of the 3 independent districts, is there a standard that they use across all districts? Or are they independent relative to how many they have for each house, for each shift? Now, obviously, they're independent districts, and the city has no authority to enter into any obligation with them, but they are a taxing district. So when you get into SAFER going from 5 to 6, the impact on a SAFER grant is going to have significant impact, because if you look at the exhibits that were provided to us, you're going to increase your overtime and increase your salary after the SAFER grant runs out, which is going to increase your tax liability on the citizenry. But my concern is, because they're independent, they operate independently, and there appears to be no standards other than safety, whatever that standard is for that particular district. So I would ask that the committee be provided from each independent district, if you can, if they allow, if they will comply with the rationale behind how they operate. Now, and I don't know if anybody here can answer the question, Hartford has 24 on, 2 days off. That's how they operate. 1 day on, 2 days off. Is there a standard within the independent districts of West Haven? Are they 8-hour days? Are they 12-hour days? Are they 124 and 2 off? Are they all the same? I assume it's collectively bargained. I don't have the independent contracts in front of me. So I'm looking for information, because these independent districts operate on their own with very little oversight other than the commissioner, the commissioners, and of course the citizenry accepting their tax rate. That's it. They're a separate municipality. They do what they want to do. Allentown got sucked into the city because of its liabilities. Why they did that is their business. But the point is, asking us to take action on independent districts when we don't have information about those districts, or they fail to share information with us, makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to agree to anything. So I would ask that questions that I raised be forwarded from Julian, I guess, or from us to the proper people within the city to respond. The only other thing I can say is on the appendices regarding the salaries, Allentown did not give us 2022. The other ones did. I would ask that Allentown update the response for the salaries. And the purpose of this really is nothing more to show than, has there been a significant dip when you look at within the pandemic, what the salary structure was? Because some employees, of course, were negatively impacted by the pandemic, not only within the job aspect, but also within their salaries. This is just to give us information, hopefully to show the various impacts for each district before we decide on a $5,000 or $10,000 pandemic stipend, which I've already made my position very clear on that. But so clear question, standards within the 3 independent districts, if we could have that that would help a great deal.
If I may, Mr. Chairman. So I met with the two independent fire district chiefs. They have not expressed any opposition to providing information. So Julian, if you get me what's being requested, I will forward it to them with great haste, and we will hopefully get that information. Allentown Fire Chief Terenzio was on the call. He might be able to answer your manpower questions better than I. But like I say, on the chiefs are not, there must be a miscommunication. The chiefs are not unwilling to provide information, and if Julian gets me that, I think we'll be able to provide that information.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up.
Sure.
Mr. Chair. When you look at the salaries and the personnel that were given to us, the total is 92 individuals, yet the $10,000 request, when you add everything up, is over 100 people. I don't know what the disparity is. They say there's 103 people that would get the 10 or 100 and some odd would get the benefit, whereas on the salaries that were given to us, when you total up all three independent districts, the total is 93. So it's kind of like what number is accurate and who's getting what if this were to pass us. That's another manpower issue that could be shared.
That's a great question that requires an answer, which I can't answer.
Yeah,
today,
I
but
understand.
I will
Just putting it on the
definitely get an
record.
answer out there.
Right. And I appreciate your response. So those are questions that, as you can imagine, are still out there that need to be addressed before at least I can be comfortable voting. Thank you.
I just want to take notice. I think we may have jumped to item 5D, discussion of the firefighters contract, but we could do that and get that out of the way. Is there more to be said? I mean, Julian gave us a great summary of where we are on that issue. There are 2 firefighter agreements that have been brought to the board for approval in the last several months, and I think people have summarized where the board was on that topic, involving both the hazard pay, the minimum staffing, as well as the minimum manpower stuff, and the SAFER grant impact. The conversation with the union, as I understand, are ongoing.
Yes, the sound advice of the OPM board was taken back in the union discussions.
It's not the OPM board, it's the MAR board.
I mean, the MAR board, excuse me. The MAR board, and Chief Terenzio is on the call, and I think he can confirm that we have an agreement on the minimum manning issue, which I think will satisfy the board.
Is that individual willing to speak to us today?
Chief?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning, all. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. We have followed the recommendation, guidance, and requirements of the board. We did sit down and we did come up with the following change to the tentative agreement regarding the manpower. In the event a SAFER grant is awarded, the department minimum staffing shall be 6 firefighters per shift. During the period that the SAFER grant is 100% funded, the parties agree to revert to a minimum of 5 firefighters per shift as minimum staffing once the SAFER grant is no longer 100% funded. We would hope that the board would consider this change in order to address their concern that the cost is not on the city once the grant expires, which is the period of performance on this year's grant would be 3 years, and this proposal is cost neutral.
Mr. White has a question.
Yes, thank you very much. Can I ask the reason for using that approach and incorporating it in an agreement as opposed to leaving the increased manning to your discretion? And you get to the same point, but you just don't have an agreement with the union, on that. What's 100% funding? And, there's lawyers can fly spec things to death, but present company excluded. But, I guess I'm curious as to why you came there. It seems to be an attempt to get some kind of contractual obligation on the part of the city in there when there's no need.
if that's questions directed to me, the reason that came up was in negotiations is that ask actually came from the union, which at the time was in line with what we wanted to accomplish is meeting the staffing requirements of the NFPA 1710 standard for our district, which its demand zone is over 3,000 people per square mile, and they require 6 people on duty per shift, with 4 people on a first response unit. It didn't seem like it was an issue that we would want to go to task on, and we simply felt, okay, that's fine. And during one of the MARB meetings, subcommittee meetings, member Mr. Egan so adequately provided that, yes, in my assessment, any level of need, if it's within budgetary constraints, I could upstaff as much as I would need to meet my obligation in protecting the city of West Haven and the district that I'm assigned responsibility. It did meet that challenge, and that's essentially what it was.
I mean, is there, if I may.
Go ahead, Mr. White.
Is there a potential that when the SAFER grant is no longer 100% funded, that the union would take the position that by not going back, not keeping the 6-person manning, that you in fact are jeopardizing the safety of the citizenry, and therefore trying to negotiate to keep that 6-man level as a matter of contract rather than as a matter of your discretion?
Mr. Tiernan?
Yeah, I'll handle that question, Chief.
Thank you.
Look, minimum manning is a negotiated part of every fire contract I've ever been involved in. And of course, if union members of the fire department feel that their safety is being impaired by any sort of manning issue, they can always raise that. I mean, so, you know, could they raise it in the future? Yes, but we have a manning requirement now. We would go back to the manning requirement we had before. We have a history on the prior manning requirement. So if there is a grievance, I feel confident we'd win the grievance. You can't worry about potential legal actions that you don't think are going to be meritorious in terms of how you try to accomplish your goals. If you did, people could just threaten lawsuits and you'd never get anywhere. So we think this would be effective. It's clear. We think that a mediator at the State Labor Board would see that it's clear. Everybody signs the contract. They're going to understand it. It's a money issue. It's not a safety issue. The manning issue would be tied to a money issue. A safety issue would be a lot larger issue, and that would go to mandating. That would almost go to a, you know, I don't know, a state mandate or whatever, or an OSHA type violation as to whether we have manning. So we're confident that that is not something that has a significant chance of success.
Mr. Brockman.
I appreciate the language change that's been agreed to. Do we have a copy of that language that was read to us? And if so, can we get it emailed to us? Or?
I would say the latter.
Okay, thank you.
I'll make sure it's done. I'll try to do it while I'm here.
Perfect.
Mr. Waxenberg.
Yeah, it's interesting because Attorney Tiernan just said it's not a safety issue, it's a money issue. Then why are we increasing?
Okay, I misspoke.
I understand.
It's not a safety issue in terms of the negotiation and how it would be presented to the State Labor Board. It would be presented to the State Labor Board as a money issue. It is always a safety issue. Let's not be confused. The city of West Haven wants their firefighters safe. We want manning requirements that are safe. We want our city protected by our firefighters. But there are limits in terms of money. And so, you know, I suppose you could have 10 men a shift or 10 men and women a shift. But, you know, we come to agreements based on what the city can afford. And has been previously alluded to, the city absorbed Allentown because they couldn't get a budget approved because of monetary issues. And so monetary issues are real in terms of the negotiation. You wouldn't have a negotiation otherwise. So it is always a safety issue. I will rephrase that we don't think it is a problem with a state labor board grievance or a state labor board municipal prohibitive practice.
I need to know the rationale for the increase. It's as simple as that. You've got City of Hartford that has 4 people per house. You're asking for 6. Please put down what the 6 people will do. What's being jeopardized now by only having 5? The union came to you asking for 6 according to a standard. That standard could have been 8, could have been 12, could have been 14. I don't know. You had a report from 2013 that you have not implemented. Now you're picking from that report to do manning. Don't cherry pick from a report for things that you want and ignore things that in the report we've asked you to do. This independent fire district has been around since God left Chicago, and it makes no sense, but that's not my issue. The issue I'm looking for is very simple. Rationale, why are we going from 5 to 6? The issue of them losing the SAFER grant, it's like grandfathering in the legislature. It doesn't happen. It continues. So once you go from 5 to 6, the language saying you can go back to 5 is nonsense. You know, politically they'll be at 6. And there's going to be a potential impact on the city and town. If there's a need for the safety and welfare of the firefighters or of the community, regardless of whatever standard is out there by some national organization, personally, I would like to know that. And I'd be voting in favor of it, saying that we need to make sure that the safety and welfare of our community is not going to be compromised. That's all I'm asking for.
Okay. Mr. Waxenberg has given you his advice. Do you have a quick response, Mr. Jackson?
Very quick. All 3 districts strive to achieve NFPA standards. And those NFPA standards indicate that there shall be 2 on a rescue and 4 on a larger piece of apparatus. So if a rescue goes out, we cannot achieve that standard in Allentown by having 3 firefighters left in the house. That 4th firefighter is required, and the SAFER grant requires participation in that.
Okay.
The flip side is the ISO ratings of communities depend on certain things, including fire service coverage. So we may be able to keep the taxes down, but if we fail to meet ISO ratings, your insurance goes up, paying out of a different pocket.
And I think you've been asked for, and you're going to provide all that data and all that rationale in a written document at some point in the near future. Mr. Valsigno, I believe, was looking for.
Yes, I agree with Mr. Waxenberg. Well, one thing I can.
Can I just, if you're not speaking, please mute your microphone, whether you're online or in the room. Thank you.
One thought I have on this is, and I can almost assure you that your next labor contract, this is going to become a bargaining chip. This is going to be something that's going to be discussed. It's going to be debated. And once you go from 4 to 6, I find it very, very hard to mitigate back down. So I find this to be problematic. I also looked at what Mr. Waxenberg looked at with the manning in Hartford, which I think is certainly has the same issues on a bigger scale. And I think that this has to be well thought out and debated before I could approve anything going forward.
Mr. Egan.
Thank you. Yeah, just to clarify some discussion at the subcommittee by the chief. Chief, are you still on the line?
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay. Chief, just for clarification, currently you have a minimum of 5, and when you get a response, let's say it's just a fire call, you would run 2 rigs out there with 2 and 2?
That's actually 3 and 2, sir. It's we staff with 5. We staff the quint, the engine, and the 2-man ALS unit. When there's a fire call and the ALS unit is in-house, we essentially, quotation, beach the rescue unit, and those two individuals become firefighters and do on the response. So that's a total of 5 responding when the rescue is in service. Now, our average call volume for EMS is about 68 to 70%. And that would leave us, during that time, only 32% of the time actually being able to respond in accordance with not just NFPA, which is a recommendation to Mr. Waxenberger's concern. We're also violating a mandated statute, which is OSHA, which provides for a 2 in, 2 out, which I'm sure you're more than familiar with. But when the rescue is out, we essentially respond with only 3 individuals on 2 pieces of equipment.
Right. So what this would do is, and that was my understanding of what you explained at the subcommittee, is that what this would do is on a fire call, you'd be able to have 4 and 2 or 3 and 3, however you want to staff your fire response rigs. If your ALS unit was out, you'd at least be able to provide 3 and 1 or 2 and 2 to pull the 2 fire units to a call. Correct?
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to have clarification, make sure I understood what you said, right. And as far as, Chief, it might be, I think, beneficial for the committee and some other folks just to, at a later date or next time when we speak about this, when the language comes before us at the next meeting, to maybe just have some, logistics that you could map out in a document of, the importance of having staffing. I'm certainly aware of NFPA 1710 and what that recommends. And that might be something to help assuage some concerns and bolster the reason why you need to upstaff, or not upstaff, to have more adequate staffing on the fire units. As far as moving forward, I think, and like I said, we'll save this to next time when we see the language and if everybody's comfortable with it, but assuming folks would be, I think the 3-year period would give time also to let the chief evaluate whether, there was a benefit to having this, and then what happens in the next collective bargaining agreement and what they want to, try and go for next time, we can deal with next time. That's it.
Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Kinnison.
I just want to make sure that when we do get a response that we do have a little bit of clarity, because I recall actually working hand in hand with the fire chiefs, going there with Mike Walsh. And when the development of the tri-district agreement was put into place, it states that all other districts react at the same time. So it is not a district standing independently. They share and they all respond to fire. So while we're hearing it all in a silo, it really isn't a silo, and that was the reason for the tri-district. So I think that information needs to come forward, because I heard from the chiefs themselves where they will say, if it is close, we will help each other. It's a brotherhood, and they do respond. So we're only looking at this in a silo, and I think that we need to look at it a little broader. And that was the reason for that tri-district.
Mr. Tierney. And I understood that from Mr. Waxenberg that he wants that incorporated for all the districts. He's got the numbers and so on and so forth that need to be explained. So my plan is to include all that. I mean, I think that makes sense.
Mr. White.
Just a quick question to maybe close this is, can you refresh my recollection as to the dollars we're talking about? In other words, an annual, if you get the SAFER grant, how much is it? And the issue would be, if the end of the 3 years, would you continue that? And what kind of cost are we talking about?
As to the latter part of the question, I think based on all the available data we have now, I don't know how we would continue it. Like, I don't know what would the revenue source be that we could continue this? The hope would be that either there's some increase in tax revenue or whatever, but people have to be prepared that you wouldn't continue this. I don't have the exact numbers with me.
I think it was about 430,000.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, I have a question, I guess maybe for OPM staff. The fire report, did the fire report address this issue of the staffing in Allentown and make any recommendations in terms of them needing to increase staffing? I don't recall.
Generally, that report didn't make recommendations about operational issues like minimum staffing. It was more on sort of dealing with the administrative structure of each district and opportunities to look at, consolidating efforts. We've talked about the pension management, back office type work and things of that nature.
Consolidation.
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Just to kind of focus on the procedural history of these updates, is there a time frame within which we are expected to act upon these issues before us? I know we're just here to receive an update, but kind of resolving some of these outstanding issues within a reasonable time frame, I think, will be helpful, particularly as it relates to really understanding what the counter point is on the hazardous pay.
Yes,
Mr.
so
Foyne?
and I apologize that we haven't gotten to that point, but my plan would be to have all available information presented to the subcommittee at their next meeting so that we are in a position that this can be voted on up or down at your next meeting. So hopefully all the boxes are checked. We will review the transcript for the minutes if we need exactitude. Hopefully Julian sends us something with exact nature of what people are looking for. But that would be the plan, that we will put everybody together as the goal to have this in a form based on all the questions we've heard now and all the questions before, that the subcommittee can make a recommendation at their next meeting and that you can vote on it at your next full meeting.
And to be clear, we will endeavor to resolve the questions related to minimum staffing levels as they relate to all three districts. There will be resolution of the implications for the contract language as it relates to the SAFER grant, and there will be resolution of the appropriate threshold for a hazardous pay, if any, right?
Yes.
Are those the three core issues?
If I have anything to do with it, we will have someone here either on that screen or, if I have the ability and the time, even putting together a PowerPoint, making this a logical, rational argument as to each point, not looking at any point as more major or minor than any other, and really addressing every concern you have so that the board can feel comfortable that they've chewed the facts over and it's ready for a vote up or down at your next meeting. But that the subcommittee would actually be able to review that and make a recommendation at their next meeting. More important.
And Mr. Freund, to answer Ms. Shaw's question, that complies with any statutory deadlines that we might be. As I recall, for these, we don't have a deadline, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, you made that change.
That's tier 4. No, that's tier 4, I think.
Yeah.
You have to get our approval regardless of. Anyway, other questions, Mr. White?
The other issue outstanding, as I recall, was the bonus from, I guess it's ARPA funds. And I don't know if this has been requested, but do we have any idea what other municipalities have done with regards to those?
We asked
Okay,
that.
good. So I'm sure we'll get that when we talk about it. Thank you.
Could I follow up on that question?
Mr. Hamilton?
Yeah, because I saw somewhere in this package, I believe there was a survey of some sort, but it seemed pretty bare bones, and I don't know whether, I think what it showed was it was kind of like a couple pages. Did other people see that? And
So that was, sorry to jump in, that was embedded in the, there was a list of open items and then the city's responses to some of those items. And so it was in that section of the materials after the,
Yeah, it just
Sort
didn't
of towards the
provide
back.
much information. You know, it seemed to be pretty bare bones, and I'm really looking for something a little more comprehensive than that. I mean, I think the end of it said it didn't identify any municipalities for one, and it seemed to show, I think the last item said there was, I think, 2 respondents or something. So it didn't have a whole lot of meat on it as far as I could tell.
I wonder if we could reach out to CCM, who's usually very good at getting the municipal bargaining information, and they may be able to provide some info on that. I presume, based upon news reports, that the state and the state employee bargaining units probably have similar information as well, but we'll leave that be.
We can look into that.
so the city should probably make that request since they're a member of CCM and we are
Okay.
not.
I have no problem with that. Okay. Mr. Egan.
Yeah, just to follow up, I think Mr. Hamilton will recall this. At the subcommittee, we specifically requested this information regarding who within the contiguous communities of West Haven would have received a bonus and what the bonus was. And also, I think it was the 5 above and 5 below West Haven on the Anglic chart. I think that was the request that we made at the subcommittee.
Okay, I think we've thoroughly vetted item 5D. Unless people have other questions or comments, maybe we'll move back to 5B, the monthly financials. I assume someone from the city can walk us through the monthly report that's in your materials, provide us an overview of their status of the year-to-date budget.
Certainly, happy to do it. Scott Jackson from the City of West Haven. As you would imagine, at the end of period 2, it's still pretty, there's nothing really remarkable about the results thus far. Some of the items that I had been, I had some concern about, personnel related, overtime is certainly high, but given our staffing levels, I anticipate being able to identify transfers from wages to overtime to cover potential overtime deficits. Another item that is, I think, an issue of concern to 169 communities is the cost of municipal solid waste. With the program that this board approved last month, we have taken an aggressive step to mitigate that. So I'm pleased with that item. Utilities and fuel costs are another item that we will need to keep a very close eye on as we move forward, because it does not look, especially with OPEC's action yesterday, that we're in for any relief anytime soon. So we're going to need to probably take early action on that. And by that, I mean toward the end of the year, to really identify where our potential pitfalls may be in that regard. On the revenue side, much like last year, we continue to track well in certain areas, including licensing and tax collection. We are on board with where we were last year. As you'll recall, last year we did have a revenue overage of $2.7 million. So seeing that at this stage in the game, mirroring those trends is a positive item. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions you ask. It is still early. One other thing, as I've already mentioned today, and as the councilwoman can attest, at every council meeting, I am doing my best to utilize the word transfer. Transfer. Don't wait until the end. Transfer in advance. Be a strong manager of your budget. So I have initiated a process of providing month-to-date reports to the departments with identifications of areas that they might want to take a look at. Some expenditure areas may be seasonal. Some may be the result of major encumbrances for known expenses. But it includes where we are in the fiscal year, what the percentage is that you utilized, much like it's the exact same report that you have. Actually, it's just broken down by department and given to each department. And anything that is above the percentage of the year is something that you probably want to take a look at and determine whether or not you want to make a transfer now because you foresee what is coming down the line and that account may run at a deficit. So we're doing a couple of different things, and you know, knock wood, we've gotten good support from department heads on it. So that's my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions from Mr. Brockman?
I've got one small question, then I want to go to the overtime question, but just, can you explain what, on page 3, there's MISC other agencies fire department share of, and then I'm not sure what of is, and it's, so, yeah,
that's,
yeah.
Oh, I thought you were raising your hand to answer. No, that is emergency services revenue, E911.
Got it. So on going to the overtime, because I did notice that we've got a bunch of the departments that appear to be certainly above, let's say we're 25% of the year, certainly above that in terms of their overtime. Some because the state didn't really budget for overtime necessarily in their agency, or budget a very small amount. But could you speak to what is the process for overtime sort of being approved? Is there an approval process that goes through higher than the supervisor level, and what does that look like? And if you think it's largely attributable to lack of or a high number of vacancies, if in the future we can get a departmental breakdown of budgeted positions and vacancies so we know where those vacancies exist.
Absolutely. I believe that the personnel director is actually working on that vacancy list as we speak. I don't recall if it was requested at the subcommittee meeting, but it's one of the items that we wanted to submit to the subcommittee so they could have a better understanding of how we might be able to manage what appears to be an overtime that's going to go into deficit.
Ms. Kennison?
Sorry about that. In the monthly update, it was mentioned about the FY21 audit, and I just wanted to follow up to make sure that those deliverables were all met at that time, so that we're on track for the FY21 audit with the auditors.
We are on track. We continue to get drips and drabs from the auditors as to additional items. If we give something and they have further questions, it comes back. And then there are some other items. I just had to sign off on some requests for legal disclosures, things like that continue to come in, but they are very, they're rigorous in providing the open items list. So items go off, items come on, but it is a rolling process, and we've gotten no indication that we are slipping from that November 30.
Very good. Just want to make sure you're on target.
Just quick, Mr.
Mr.
Brockman.
Chairman?
So overtime's approved by the supervisor. What the finance director does is he follows the trends and he sends down, here's where your budget trends are. And what we're going to change that we've never done in the past is he's going to force transfers in real time now, so that when they're looking at their budget, if they think there's money in there, it's not going to be there like it was in the past. So supervisors are going to have to tend to and manage overtime or go up the chain of command if the overtime is as a result of changing circumstances or emergencies. They're going to have to let us know that. Just one glimmer of light, small ball, good news, which relates to Mr. Jackson's comments about oil and electricity. Going to an electric fleet out in the west, they've noticed that as they have their drought and their hydro plants have to cut down, they can't charge their vehicles. So it's a catch-22. We actually have chargers that are connected to rooftop solar. So we actually, and we are moving, I think we have a dozen electric vehicles now. We're moving to electrify our fleet, and hopefully, and we're expanding our solar array. In fact, you'll start to get more contracts along those lines. So hopefully that will be inflation proof if we get our solar directly, if we get our electric charging directly from our solar. we don't get enough good news to you guys, so.
Yes, sir, from the city.
Matt Cavallaro, West Haven Board of Ed. Prior to the members' questions, could I just run through the board's monthly financials?
Yes.
So through period 2, we are in line with our historical spending. Just a few line items that I'd like to call to your attention. We had a significant number of retirements and resignations. So currently our severance pay line item is overexpended. Within the next few board meetings, I am bringing a budget transfer for them to vote on. We've waited this long because unfortunately we're still seeing some resignations and retirees, and we're still doing some hiring. So we were waiting for that to flush out to call from the appropriate salary line items where to take the money to cover the overage. C68, the student activities, that is a reimbursement that is coming from the city based on some summer work that was approved. So once that reimbursement is brought to the board, that line item will be within budget. Our property and liability insurance is significantly higher than it is in years past. That's not something that I pay. That is something that is journal entered by the city onto my budget. So we are reviewing that with the city. If it in fact is significantly over, we will present our board with another budget transfer. And
Why is it higher?
We're still working through that. They haven't given me the answer as of yet. I still haven't seen the bill. And the G accounts, G string of accounts, those are our instructional supplies. What we do, we've had a long-standing practice of placing anything that we need to start the school year prior to our state and federal grants being approved by the State Department of Ed. They are put towards our budget. So you'll see the encumbrances on our local budget. And when those grants are approved and we pay the items, they will flow and the expense will be correctly charged to the particular grant. So the line items that appear to be expended due to the encumbrances in future months will go back into line with where they should be according to the budgets. And that's all.
Questions, Mr. White?
Yes. Is there two questions? Is there any sentiment or discussion about ARPA money going for a sort of special bonus to teachers? And if so, since I know that you are concerned about retention and recruitment, are other districts, school districts, using any ARPA money for, bonuses for, modest bonuses for teachers?
I believe some of the larger districts are. Unfortunately, we're not in the position to provide bonuses or anything like that. A lot of our ARPA money has gone to HVAC projects, to infrastructure upgrades, providing our classrooms with technology. So we don't have the money available to provide such a bonus.
Thank you.
Mr. Hamilton.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to follow up on Mr. Jackson's point about the utilities and energy accounts and the impact on your budget. And I guess this really applies for both the city and the Board of Education. I agree with you that is an area where you potentially have some exposure, some downside exposure in terms of electricity rates, heating fuel, gasoline, diesel. So I'd like to get some more clarity from both the city and the Board of Education what your current status is on each of those areas. For instance, are you locked in on electricity for a multi-year period, or are you floating with the current standard offer rate from United Illuminating or CL&P? I'm not sure. I think you have United Illuminating there in West Haven. Same thing with respect to fuel oil, diesel fuel for school buses. I don't know whether that is on the school district or whether that risk is sort of borne by the school bus, your transportation provider. But if not, then have you locked in diesel? And if so, for what period, at what price? Same thing with respect to gasoline and heating oil for both the city and and the Board of Ed. So I don't know whether, you probably don't have all that information off the top of your head. If you do, you can tell us now. If not, if you could follow up with something that could come to us later on just, where you are. And then I suppose a follow-up to that would then be, if you do have exposure there, have you started to try to quantify what that financial exposure is? If current rates stay where they are, if they go up further, what's going to be the impact on your budget for the current fiscal year? So I'm interested in that information.
Absolutely. I can speak a little bit to the city side, but what we can do is we can tally up the status of our contracts and those things. We do lock in. Mr. Hamilton, you have been around for a couple of years, so you have seen dips and spikes. And so you have seen the fights that happen when one day you get a bill and suddenly there's a fuel surcharge on it, and you go to the contract and there's nothing in the contract that allows for a fuel surcharge. So the fights that happen there. But we can get you some contractual information. One of our mitigation methods is we are doing a large solar rooftop structure at the police department and a car canopy structure at City Hall, where we are locking in for a decade at 12.9 cents. Which is below the current rate. And we can add some predictability to our utilization via enhanced use of solar, and we continue to look for more opportunities.
Yeah, you're also going to get in the near future a contract for a solar array on a 40-year retired landfill in the city, which should also help. And just note, we have a fuel cell at one of our 24-hour electric users, the sewer plant, so that helps mitigate costs in these circumstances because the fuel cell is delivering energy at a fixed rate.
From the board's perspective, we have solar panels on 4 of our schools, and we're actively looking to get them into the other schools as long as the roofs are able to hold the demand of the solar. The diesel for the bus company, it's paid by the board because we're a tax-free entity, but then it does come off the monthly charge of our contractor. So they are reimbursing us for that. And any third-party rate for UI that the city locks into, the board also is a party to that contract.
Are there currently any electric supplier electric generation contracts that are in place for the city or the board?
There are, but I don't have the detail on it right now, but we can certainly get that to you.
Okay.
We would be in the same contract.
Okay. Just a second follow-up on the investment income, which should be an area where you've got, I would think, probably some upside budget potential. But in looking at your numbers, and I do appreciate that you gave us, both for the city and the Board of Ed, we have Munis reports, which I appreciate. On investment income, it looks a little curious because you're showing 39,000, almost 40,000 year to date, but your month to date actual for August was only $3,300. Something doesn't add up there. Something's not posted, I suspect, because if you brought in, $36,000 in the month of July, it wouldn't have dropped to $3,200 in the month of August. I suspect, you're going to far exceed your budget here because interest rates are going up, which is great, at least for purposes of interest income. But, it does look like as of, September 21st, something wasn't posted here. I'm guessing because it just doesn't make sense at 3,200.
That is exactly the case. It's an issue of timing.
So I guess the broader issue is it raises concerns for me about the diligence with which the city is, recording financial transactions and closing, doing formal month-end closes and those kinds of things. It should be that by the 21st of September, you've had a formal cutoff on the prior month, hopefully by somewhere around the 10th of the month, 10th after the 10th of the month after the prior month. You ought to be having a formal close that says, okay, everything is posted. We've double checked it, that people are, making sure that everything's there. And this is telling me that there's some interest income sitting on some bank statement somewhere that hasn't made it to your general ledger. But, are there other things that haven't made it to your general ledger that are, more significant? And so I guess it's a process issue that concerns me, that, we need to still see improvement in this area in terms of just the core day-to-day, day-in meat and potatoes finance.
It is, and I, from coming into it, the drivers of these reports have typically been reports to the city council at their second meeting of the month. So the timing is a little bit later for the true ups on things like medical self-insurance and items like interest. But I can take a closer look at that and evaluate a little bit more to see how we might be able to retime those items so that our reports to this body are a little bit more timely.
Yeah, I think you need to have some sort of checklists and people who are assigned responsibility. It shouldn't necessarily all fall to you, but somebody in the organization needs to be really going through these reports in quite a bit of detail and making sure that everything that needs to be posted to the financial statements is posted. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you.
Other questions concerning the monthly financials for the city? Mr. Freund.
Just a reminder to the Board of Ed and City that budget transfers in excess of $50,000 will need to come to the MARB for approval at Tier 4.
Prior to going to our boards, or?
They can't go into effect unless we
Yeah,
approve it.
yeah,
So
so-
however,
Yeah, whichever, I mean, if it needs your board's approval, then it needs 2 approvals. I'm not feel strongly about the sequence, but it needs to come.
In the past, this board has preferred approval, because if they don't approve it at the local level, you don't need to.
Right.
review it.
right.
We can change that, but
It makes sense that we
do it after our.
yeah, that'd be useful for us to do something. So if it's moot, we shouldn't be looking at it. Anything else on the monthly financials? All right. We do have item 5C, review, discussion, possible action on labor contract involving the West Haven Administrators Association. As I understand it, covers 23 BOE principals and other administrators. Current contract expires August 31st of next year. The BOE and the union reached a tentative agreement for a contract with a term of next year, September 1, 23 through August of 26. This is here far in advance of those dates. At the September meeting, the West Haven Subcommittee voted to recommend the full MARB approve this contract. Anyone going to give us a summary of that?
Sure. So this is a 3-year agreement. In each year of the agreement, there is a 2% general wage increase as well as step movement. In the prior contract, the administrators union took 2 zeros and a 1% and no step movement throughout the entire contract. Each year of the contract, the active employees cost share will increase by 0.5% a year. There were no changes to the contract that will affect the Opeb liability. The total wage increase in year 1 is a little under 140,000. In year 2, a little over 154,000, and in year 3, a little over 186,000. That's all baked into our into the 5-year plan with the increases that the city has for the board in those years. We feel strongly about this contract, that it's a solid contract for us. If you could look at the the comparables to like districts, our administrators are significantly underpaid compared to the surrounding towns and the towns in our DERGs, anywhere from 15% under to as high as 30 to in the 30% under what other districts have. So we felt like they needed the step increases, and we needed to bridge the gap between those districts to maintain our staff looking for these jobs and being able to attract other individuals from outside agencies.
May I ask, are these increases accommodated in the 5-year plan?
Yes.
Questions, Mr. Egan?
Just to note, Attorney Floyd Dugas is on the line. If there are any questions, I can also be of assistance.
Thank you. Mr. Egan has a question.
Yeah, how often do people, I guess, get promoted from teacher to administrator? Just because I noticed that as the time goes by in the contract, there's been, step 1 is eliminated, so step 2 becomes the new step 1, step 3 becomes the new step 1. It evolves. So I'm just trying to think as far as impact for folks moving up into those positions, that they're going to be starting at a higher salary next year than this year and every year down the road.
That was all in an effort to raise our lowest salaries, because they were much lower than other districts. In terms of administrators our teachers are being promoted, if it's 2 a year, that's probably pretty high. So it's very few.
Other questions? Comments about this agreement? Mr. Valsigno? No?
I was just going to say, I read through it and I thought it was a very fair contract for
Okay.
for the city.
There are no questions or Mr. Brockman?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve.
Seconded.
Seconded by Mr. Egan. Beat you to the punch there. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Any abstentions? Motion carries. All right, we'll move on to item 5E, discussion of two non-labor contracts for architectural services with O'Riordan Magani Architects LLC and Russell and Dawson Incorporated. 2 contracts related to projects the city plans to fund using ARPA funding. Contract fees are $71,825 for architectural services related to improvements to the senior center and $60,000 for design of a new field house. Both require board approval. The city is here to answer any questions the board may have about these contracts. Did I get that right, Mr. Jackson?
Absolutely.
What's the field house do? Who owns that and what's it for?
Is it an athletic facility?
Okay. Parks and Rec kind of
yeah,
thing?
yeah.
Okay. Mr. White?
Yeah, this is going to be a question that I'm going to ask, I think, with all the contracts that are coming. Is there anyone connected to the city that would benefit from this contract? Personally, I'm talking about the disclosure forms.
Yes, there is nothing in the disclosure forms that caused our purchasing manager to have any concerns.
Or anything that you know about?
No.
Or that your purchase manager knows?
That's correct.
Ms. Shaw?
So as a follow-up to that, were all disclosure forms that were required received?
Yes, they would. The bid would not be accepted as complete absent those forms.
If I may.
Mr. Biller?
Would it be appropriate then as contracts come before us and a bidder is chosen, that those disclosure forms be presented to us as well, so we have an opportunity ourselves to vet out any potential conflicts or ethical issues? Any reason why we can't get that?
I would think that since they need our approval, that will give you whatever you need.
I think I'd like to ask for that moving forward then, if I can.
I believe that is the case. If there is any reason,
If we have it already, I'm sorry, I didn't see the forms. That's
right. If for some reason something's not disclosable, I'll have to go back and check. But unless I hear otherwise, we will make sure that's part of the package.
Perfect. So just
and obviate Mr. White's need to inquire.
Perfect. So just for clarity's sake, so moving forward, when we're presented with an application or a contract that we're going to ask to vote on, where we're going to hand out a contract to a vendor, we will provide it with the ethical disclosure forms.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Egan, I think, had his hand up.
Yeah, so these contracts are just for architectural renderings of these projects. They're not contractors who would actually perform the work.
That's correct. These are architectural services only.
Okay, and I would just like to follow up when it comes to a time that there's a bid put out and contractors selected, that we get obviously all the contractors who bid on it and who the selected person is, and some very clear vetting. One thing that I have a little bit of concern about with the ethics forms is that it might disclose, say, Pat Egan is chair of the whatever committee, and I own Egan Construction, but it doesn't necessarily say that there's some project going on that I approved and that my company bid on it, or I became a subcontractor for the company who got the bid. So I think we really need to get specifics on who the contractors are, and also any subcontractors, so that way we can look at whether there's maybe some conflict or something that might be flying below the radar, since there's clearly some misunderstanding or I guess general issues with when contracts or when conflicts come up.
Mr. White.
Yeah, and it would be not just the disclosure form, because as Mr. Regan said, there's a bare bones disclosure there. But if your people know, and that the administration should be asking, is there anyone connected? I suspect in most situations there isn't. But after the report on the CARES money showed that there were some issues, and it's likely to be there, I think that this is not just a paperwork issue. This goes to a trust issue and a transparency issue with the city. When we went into Tier 4, the discussion was there is a culture within the city of West Haven that has made it difficult to get them on fair footing. Progress has been made in finance, progress has been made in developing human infrastructure, but ultimately, and there's the comment by the mayor after the last meeting, prior comments by city council chair and others suggest that the MARB can go pound sand, the money's gone. So I think that transparency is going to be something that at least I am looking at in front of these things. And it's just that I'm going to be relying on folks to do some inquiry as to whether there's something beyond the disclosure thing. Is that clear and makes sense?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Falsigno.
What Mr. White just spoke about, we discussed at length recently at the subcommittee meeting, and what was asked was that every bid be presented not only with the person that was chosen or who suggested won the bid, but the process throughout the entire bid process, who they were, who the people that participated with were, that presented bids. Obviously it goes back to the trust issue and the problem with not having all these ethical standards, standard boxes checked as we've requested and asked for. So I think what Mr. White was asking about was something that we've been discussing for numerous months and meetings, and we still don't have it, which leads to why we have so many questions all the time. If we could just follow the same process on every bid and present everything accurately with all the bidders and with all the facts and figures, I think it would be a much smoother transition and more transparent.
Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. And since clarity is the order of the day, let me just add that not only am I interested and members of the board interested in the disclosure documents submitted by the principals of the selected vendor, It's really the disclosures by the decision makers. And that would be any of the officials that were responsible for making the contract award recommendation. That's where the disclosures really need to reveal whether there's any conflict of interest, whether there was any use of the official position for personal gain or for the gain of any immediate family member. We've talked about enforcement of not only the requirements that are currently set forth in city charter, but reasonable standards that municipalities should abide by when it comes to making disclosures of this type. So just to be absolutely clear, given that there have been public expressions of misapprehension, the outstanding requests for identities of the individuals required to make the disclosures and who hasn't made those ethics disclosures continues to be at the top of our list. And so as part of the ongoing review and the standard documents, want to make clear that it's the decision makers as well as the disclosures from the would-be vendors. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Kennison.
I have one more comment to add about the ethical disclosures. As a prior CFO, when ethic forms were required to come to me personally, and in that particular process, there was also a vetting amongst the administration, so that therefore, if a form is coming forward and you know that there's a relationship that stands amongst my board members who also might be connected to a vendor, that I put my own hand stamp on that to say, you did not include Mr. Jones, such and such, and I am aware that your child works in childcare, and you must disclose that. And you must disclose if you have a relationship with a vendor and a family. So it's an individual basis. It's not just the basis of the board that you sit on at that time. It's any conflict of interest at all. So I do think that it is also the responsibility of the administration, the mayor, legal, the CFO, to look at these forms and make sure that those disclosures are included. And if they're not, it's not acceptable. The person cannot be on the board, cannot participate. Thank you.
I have had a couple of people ask, should I include this on a disclosure form? And my answer is always, if you have to ask, include it.
Mr. White.
Yeah, just to follow up on Ms. Kessler's question, I mean, I'm wondering, I think I looked briefly at some of the forms. I mean, it doesn't go into a lot of detail, and that's why the conversation about, what more. And, I think it's on the theme of clarity, I think there may be a notion that we might make some suggestions on revising the form. And I hate to dip my toe in this water and sort of, at least among top decision makers, have them redo the form that's more thorough, so that when, something comes to us, we're there, people can, as you say, if the administrator puts his or her stamp on it, then that says I've made inquiry and, I'm standing by it. It might give them a little more guidance. I mean, I'll let you folks work it out. I don't want to create enormous amounts of paperwork here, but this is trust, this is transparency, so that goes to the kind of top of the list in my mind.
So one of the things that we've tried to do in the last month or so is to write down stuff that the board or the subcommittees want from the city. And Julian and the staff are making notes today, and or we'll review the tape and make notes. And we will put that in our next letter. We're going to have a regular letter. You've seen our first letter to the city on open action items. This would be, I think, another action item from the city. So we ought to probably reduce to writing the suggestions we've heard here today about what the form should look like, or information the board is interested in when the next set of contracts gets here. It also sounds like the subcommittee might be well advised to formally take on the task of making suggestions for ethics form updates. I'll just say finally, we're all giving the city advice in slow motion. At some point, our consultant is going to dig into this and find out these gaps, these governance gaps, these document gaps, procedure gaps. We're going to have I hope, a comprehensive report sometime next spring or summer that will detail, I'm sure, 30, 40, 50 action items, including updating forms for ethics matters. And so this is all of a piece, but we'll start doing it right now because, of course, contracts are going to come before this board in the next few months, and they ought to provide the information that we're asking for. So we'll get these preliminary ideas down on paper. We'll put it in our action item list, and we'll get another letter out so the city has a record of what we're looking for. Mr. Tiernan, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, just very quickly. We do have a new constituted ethics board. They have been active. I've gone over with the chair whether or not it would be prudent, and he's willing to do this, to give this board a level of greater confidence. They are reviewing the forms, they're doing others. But I can have them here at a meeting and they can give their thoughts and ideas as to what they're doing and what they're changing and how they're moving forward, if that's useful.
Sounds like at the subcommittee meeting, that might be very useful.
All right. That can happen. The chair is very welcome to doing that, of the ethics.
Mr. Biller, were you seeking recognition?
Had a question. So I see that we obviously have a couple of non-labor contracts, I think, that are before us today. And I'm just wondering timeliness on the vote. And because I will tell you that I think the information, especially the disclosure information that we've just talked about, are very important to me to vote yes or no on these contracts. And I'm just wondering, is there any sort of time requirement where these contracts have to be voted on today? Or can we put off that vote until we receive this disclosure information?
It will affect completion of the projects in a timely way because, as everybody knows, there are supply chain issues when you delay these contracts. But I don't know how to frame it. The board, you have a chair, you have a board. Your level of comfort is your level of comfort. But if you have a contract before you, yes, there is always a time element that we're trying to complete things. When it involves school buildings, of course, we have issues of summer vacation and kids coming back and the confusion and trying to get things done. So all of our contracts have a time element, but you have to do what you feel is prudent in your position.
And these contracts are also ARPA related, and there's a hard stop on the spending of ARPA dollars.
Part of my concern. So, all I would say to that is obviously there's a certain time element in everything. We want to get things done as fast as we can. My perception is, I am not an obstructionist. I think that the more clarity that we have, the more information that we're provided ahead of time in a timely manner, I think the faster that we can act with prudence and full information. So, I have difficulty voting in favor of a contract where I'm lacking some information. That's just my point.
Well, he's in a union and he's going to hate me for saying this, but I will recommend that the purchasing agent be here at every meeting and he can better address all those issues and make sure all those issues are addressed prior to submission.
I think that's to your point. I think that any person that's involved in the decision making and any items before us, I think it would be fantastic if they participated in our meetings, and then perhaps there wouldn't be this constant back and forth and requesting of information and allegations of lack of clarity.
All right, so we will take this up at a later meeting, that without objection from the board. Let's move then to, where are we now? Mark, Mr. Waxenberg, you have a question?
Just a question to the chair. Is it not necessarily now, but to put into the hopper, the idea that talking about ethical issues, that we could get involved in when we talk about the process moving forward, that the state ethics committee, I guess Lewandowski's in charge of those issues or part of those issues, that somehow there be a relationship between the state and the city for workshops. The reason I say that is there are clear violations. There are clear violations. I mean, you had a police contract that was voted on by 2 city council people that directly benefited from the contract. That's a clear legal violation of conflict of interest. Nothing was done, so there's no penalty associated with that. Whether they did that knowingly or unknowingly is the issue. So my question is, though we have an ethics commission of, I assume, lay people being advised by legal counsel, I feel more comfortable if in the I don't want to say remedy, but in the search for transparency, that we possibly offer state assistance to hold some sort of workshops, education of the elected officials so that they know what they have to recuse themselves when it's time for a vote or debate. I don't want to be in a position as a board member here saying, oh, if you have a son that's a teacher, you can't be on the city council. You know, it just, everybody has a relationship possibly that's going to cross over into the municipal city or town. The question is, what's my role now that I have an individual who is spouse, wife, son, daughter, niece, nephew, whatever, and I'm just not convinced that there is a knowledge base of these individuals sitting at the various committees, commissions, and even the city council so that they can vote appropriately. So making a, you know, it's a, if you look at the decision-making made by the decision makers, there are clear conflicts that exist today that people are voting on that need to be addressed. And my fear is, how do we get to that? And I'm hopeful that maybe we as a body can engage the state into some action to help them.
I can ask the staff to contact the Office of State Ethics for around the possibility of doing that. I don't know what their jurisdiction is, if it extends to municipalities. I'm not sure that it does, but I know they do seminars, and I've been in one almost every year of state service. They also have online resources that you can access, online seminars and quizzes and tests, which we all have to take every year at the state level. But let's talk to OSE, see if they're willing to make an appearance in West Haven, if the city will have them, organize. We'll try to arrange that. I think that's a good idea. They do that all the time. For state agencies, I don't know what their purview is with regard to municipalities. My guess is they don't, but we can ask.
Just so you're
Yes,
aware,
ma'am.
Mr. Secretary, we did put that in the budget for training to occur in ethics
For
the budget for the next 2 years. So as we start to move forward, it is in the budget for training.
the city,
Yes, sir.
for ethics training
Yes, sir.
by OSE.
We didn't state
Okay.
whether it was OAC
My
or
concern
whether
is
it was a firm.
would OSC see this as within their purview, and if they don't,
Sure.
I can't make them. They don't report to me, but they're independent. So we'll inquire. Yes, no, we knew ethics was going to be a big part of the going forward reforms here, and we're getting a preview today of where we're going to land on that. But we have to get our consultant engaged as well. But we can start that work now. As I say, we'll put this down in writing, and we'll get guidance out to the city about approval of contracts going forward, things that the board wants to see that they've enumerated today. So with that, we've moved on, I think, from the contracts to the item 5F, approval of the bond ordinances related to the Clean Water Fund loan. We have a proposed bond ordinance related to continued sewer work to comply with a consent decree, which I think we've discussed at this board before. City staff or the city's bond advisor, I'm not sure if he's here today, to provide background and explanation. Mr. Jackson was nodding.
Yes, it's a continuation of longstanding clean water loan fund projects. This is the third iteration of such contract. We did get some good news yesterday that both this phase and the prior phase, phase 2, which you have seen, they were deemed ineligible for grant, but as of yesterday, DEEP reconsidered and now has offered us the opportunity to do 20% grant. So all of the numbers associated with both the prior contract and these contracts are reduced by 20%. So this one is about 12,000 linear feet of sewer relining and replacement and manhole repair.
Any questions or comments concerning the item approving the bond ordinance related to the Clean Water Fund loan?
Oh, one other item for clarification, Mr. Secretary, is that all of the entire project is overseen by DEEP. So there are state oversight eyes on every facet of it.
Motion to approve?
Second by Mr. Egan, motion by Mr. Brockman. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Any abstentions? Motion carries. We'll move on then to the Tier 4 Action Plan, update of the financial organizational assessment that I alluded to earlier. Julian, where are we with that? This is the Whittlesey Group.
This is the Whittlesey Group, and we are on the verge of executing that agreement. They did have some suggestions regarding the timeline that they would like to incorporate into it. Still a timeline that would give us our high risk items within 30 days, our phase 1 recommendations by the end of January, but they just had some suggestions on compartmentalizing some of the phases. And we have a call tomorrow scheduled to wrap that up and hopefully get signatures on it shortly thereafter.
High level, what's the timing issue?
I think they were.
Of course, I could have asked you this yesterday, but we'll do it in front of the board. Go ahead.
Actually, they reached out after our conversation yesterday.
I'm scrambling to find their notes. It's really a function of moving a November 15th date out to a November 30th date for an inventory of policies, procedures, and internal controls, creating another deliverable earlier than that wasn't initially reflected in the timeline, but would be getting a assessment of all issues known to date and categorizing into phases: high risk, low risk, phase 1 to 4 by the end of October.
Okay.
It's really just kind of.
Can we have them appear before the subcommittee at their next meeting? Let the subcommittee speak to them about what we're looking for and let them give us a preview of what they might do, or do we have to execute the contract
We need
first?
to execute the
All right.
contract.
Well, as soon as we do that, let's get them in front of either the board or the subcommittee, whichever is the next meeting, so that we can talk to them. That'll be an agenda item to talk to Whittlesey about what we want them to do. If that's okay with everybody. I've worked with them a couple times before on earlier projects involving the need to reform some state agencies, and they did reasonably good work, as I recall. So this should be interesting. I have an idea of what work product we'll get back from them. It'll be a lengthy list of things we're going to insist that the city do. So, any discussion of that item? We can move on into update on the financial manager selection RFP process. I understand we have a little committee of the board, I think, working on that issue. Julian?
We do. We met with our volunteer work team to review an outline of the scope a couple weeks ago. Internally, we've submitted our request to go out to RFP, which is an internal process. And after this meeting, we'll get some signatures from the volunteers on their confidentiality and conflict of interest forms. And then while this is all going on, we're also working on a draft of the RFP for the work group to review.
Any questions, comments about that process? So that will be the vendor that will take the Whittlesey report and see that it gets implemented. Will be embedded with the city, and we'll get the reforms done. Mr. Brockman?
Just remind us the timeline for when we hope to have somebody on the ground.
Approximately around the same time that we'd be getting our high priority roadmap from Whittlesey. So we're looking at, originally we were shooting for, January 1. It may not be quite that soon, but we kind of want to have them in place and onboarded around the same time that we have that report, so they can, so they have a good base of information to start with. Yeah.
Mr. White.
Yeah, with all these folks sort of coming on board, who is responsible for the follow-up to the Cohn-Resnick report, which said, we found some serious issues within the small sample of the CARES process that may be going on throughout the city? Who is looking at whether that's going on in the rest of the city, and if so, where?
The Whittlesley financial assessor is been asked in their statement of work to take a look at all of the audit reports, everything that has been issued in the past, and look at all of those inefficiencies, control issues, fraud, waste, and pull all of that together within their assessment, so then they can evaluate the highest areas.
It's
We'll start.
And they are not just looking for, okay, a lot of bad stuff happened here. Here are the things to do so it won't happen again.
Correct.
As opposed to, or in addition, well, you got to tell us what happened in the past and whose fingers are in the pot. Because otherwise, I think this is just an administrative thing, and we are talking about trust. We have in front of us evidence or suggestions by professionals that there's other stuff going on in the city. And for us to say, oh, never mind, let's just make sure it doesn't, the horse is out of the barn, let's just make sure we close the door. I mean, and I know from the subcommittee, there seems to be perhaps some pushback on the part of some that this should be a forward-looking thing as opposed to a forward-looking and a what happened.
They're not going to do a look back and redo what Cohen already did. They're going to take the Cohen report, what has been identified as weaknesses and areas of concern, take that under advisement, as well as the independent auditor has a list of audit items that haven't been addressed for years. And those items, if they had been addressed, maybe would have stopped some of the stuff that happened, as you know. So they are going to do a forward looking of the controls and items that need to be put into place based on that report. They're not going to go back in and redo another dive after what we've already paid Cohen to do, if that's what you're asking. Okay.
I will just say when it comes before me, I have a problem with that. In that, you know, Cohen looked at a small segment, the grant, and they said there are practices here that are with people with conflicts and so forth. I'd like to know, in the past, has that happened in the bigger scheme of things? And if so, maybe we should make that transparent as opposed to, oh, the door's closed, let's forget about it. I think it makes us look bad. I don't think we're fulfilling our obligations to the city. And I understand the administrative kind of, you know, consultant, I don't know anything the consultant tells me, kind of thing. But I really want a portion by somebody to bring to light some of the types of practices that happened before, what happened, and to do that. Now, I don't know if my colleagues feel the same way, but when it comes up, I'm going to argue for doing that.
I think that we're going to achieve what you're asking for, just based on their evaluation, and they do that full financial assessment. If we find that there is still a piece that needs to be done, we do have funds that are available to go and re-audit or do a further extensive audit. I think that my suggestion would be is that in addition to the financial assessor, when we're done, they need an internal auditor. So they state that they have an internal auditor, but we've never heard or seen any internal audit reports. That is an internal audit function, I think, that you're referring to. And we do have that in our budget to be able to expand upon that.
That's a process. Okay. I don't want to carry this out, but that's a process and procedure thing, which which I think is important, but I just want to unearth the skeletons of the closet.
So I'm just going to observe, to the best of my knowledge, maybe someone can, I don't know, anyone in the room who knows the answer to this. What happened is the subject of a federal law enforcement investigation. I think they were indictments. There's going to be a full accounting there. That may still be ongoing for all we know. The city will have to account to, I believe it's the state in the first instance for that money. It passed through us to them. The feds will want it back. So there will have to be a very precise accounting of that, I assume, by someone, presumably the city. They told us they budgeted to give that back, so that's going to have to happen. I think Whittlesey can drill down to find out whatever they want, whatever we ask them to find out, if I'm not mistaken. I'm getting a nod from staff.
True, but it wasn't built into the statement of work as Mr. White is proposing today. So I just want that to be aware. It would have to be an amendment. Okay.
And just quickly, my comments were not to the DeMassa CARES thing. This is additional stuff that the feds are not looking at.
City funds.
Pardon? City funds, correct.
Mr. Regan.
Yeah, so just to, I guess, clarify where I think Mr. White's going, but certainly where I'd like to be is we've been kicking this around for some time. It's been a year since the DeMassa scandal. We waited for an audit report. We have an audit report. The audit report shows all sorts of irregularities. And so it's uncovered, right? So when you look at things, and I brought this up at a couple meetings, where you have someone getting a $20,000 check that says COVID bonus. Okay, so we know that. And I think a little bit of the fatigue here with this ongoing issue is that it seems like that was the end of it, right? So here's what happened. Someone got a check for a COVID bonus. People got paid out who are exempt employees for comp time that was used, and a myriad of other issues. As far as a consultant coming in and doing that, I don't need to wait for a consultant. One, there's nobody more familiar with the ongoings of this, and certainly this board and its subcommittee. And I think we've talked about doing maybe a few, like a quarter for each year over the last maybe 3 years of random samplings of expenditures, because I think there's a whole lot of a bigger issue that's going on. And I think there is some questions that certainly I have, I think this board has, and the taxpayers of the state of Connecticut and West Haven has, as far as how money was spent, whether it be CRF funds or whether it be just general tax dollars. So I think as far as inquiring, taking the Cohn-Resnick audit as somewhat of a roadmap for us, I think we could do that at the subcommittee level, have a meeting with specific items where we want specific answers. Why was this person given a COVID bonus? What does that mean? Who authorized it? Who is it and why? Why were people paid out for comp time when they're exempt employees, and it is in clear conflict with the 2007 resolution from the town council and a 2017 communication from the personnel director that was referenced in a 2019 letter by the corporation council justifying the mayor's payout for vacation time. So I think we could get into that at a subcommittee level. I'm pretty familiar with a lot of things, and and work with that within I think the ethic ordinances, and I think really find out where just the breakdown is. To me, it's just a thought process of how do you not realize this is an issue? Who authorized this, and what were you thinking when you authorized it? And I think it could be done instead of burdening a consultant who's going to have enough work ahead of them. All the hours that we've put in already over the last 3, 4, 5 years, however long everybody's been here, I think we could handle that within, a 2-3 hour meeting, 1 or 2 at a subcommittee level.
That's fine with me. Mr. Falsigno.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. White and Mr. Egan. But this was already discussed numerous times when the Cohen-Resnick report came out. And what the Cohen-Resnick report said to me is that you took a snapshot of $1 million. That's all you did. It's a pretty big budget. You took one snapshot of $1 million. And what we suggested, and I remember specifically, is that we're going to do a random sample quarterly on different events that are taking place. And some of the larger projects, you have a huge budget that has some smaller line items and some larger line items, and periodically select at random the larger items. And we're going to do a deep dive on the numbers and find out how we got there. And I think what Cohen-Resnick suggested to me, it brought to light all the ethical issues. And if we don't really look at some of the specifics in the going on, I think that we're not doing our fiduciary responsibility. We have to really need to take a look at these things and find out how the numbers, why the numbers are, who's getting what, and how it's getting there.
I just want to, for my own clarity, are we asking for an additional resource for the board, an additional consultant? Or are you saying this is the subcommittee wants to delve into
I think the
this?
subcommittee needs to.
That's fine with me.
I think at this point.
Yep.
That's right. I think that's right. We've got enough stuff with the Cohen-Resnick, and they said, here are some
Okay.
practices that are probably going on. And I think we could do some kind of a beginning investigative plan. In truth and in fact, someone else may carry it out, whether it's Whittisley, whether it's the financial manager, whoever it is. I mean, I don't want this to be a free-for-all for consultants, but as much as I like them. So
Well,
anyway, I think
yep,
I think
I hear
Pat's
you.
idea of having us start is
Yep.
is a good.
It sounds like the financial manager scope of work should include whatever Whittlesey comes up with, but also whatever the subcommittee comes up with as changes we won't expect to see. And that's what the manager will be embedded to implement with the city when they get on board next, probably summer or fall.
I guess I'm confused as far as the role of the board in the subcommittee versus the role of somebody who would do, such as you're calling it, investigation. I'm just a little uncomfortable about that and just want to make sure that we understand the roles that we play.
Well, let me see if I can clarify. It sounds to me as though the subcommittee wants to ask the city some pointed questions about matters that were surfaced in the Cohen report and other matters that may have been publicly reported, and get answers at the subcommittee level. It sounds like not so much an investigation, but an inquiry by a subcommittee of the board, which, unless anyone has objection, that sounds okay to me. Ms. Shaw has been seeking recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And as a member of the West Haven Subcommittee, I'd like to add my perspective on the resources necessary to undertake the kinds of inquiry that has been mentioned. First, let's just be very clear. Well, from my perspective, there is the review of the city's current financial management practices and its structure, which ought to reveal some of the discrepancies that were identified in that subset of the Cohen-Resnick review, right? Issues related to written procedures, segregation of duties, issues with its ledger. So in my mind, that is a current review of current practices, which could reveal a lot of information about how city funds have been expended, recognizing that Cohen-Resnick was focused on the ARPA funds. So there's the current review. There are the prospective recommendations around the structure for the city's management of its financial affairs going forward. So those are the points in time. The retrospective look that Mr. White has mentioned, in other words, the inquiry regarding the any specific cases of malfeasance in the past, I do believe that is something that we expressed a great interest in. I do think that focused inquiry ought to originate and be driven at the subcommittee level. I do think additional resources are necessary. I have a lot of confidence in the focus and the sustained attention that the subcommittee members have directed to these affairs, but we are an oversight board. And I believe we need boots on the ground to really do the kinds of forensic analysis that is comparable to the review that was undertaken by Cone Resnick. So if there is an appetite to broaden the aperture and to really get at the kinds of weaknesses that we saw and were evident in that forensic analysis, then I think we need a forensic approach. And I don't feel confident that we as a subcommittee have the ability on a month-to-month basis just by asking questions, because we know our questions do not get answered in a timely way. We need someone on the ground who is uncovering the kinds of, who is conducting the kind of review that I think this subcommittee has indicated an appetite for.
I think just to close it out, is I think the subcommittee is the focus to flesh this out. At least in my mind, the first step is for us to put together some obvious questions that we have. And then we can sort of sort out who's best to do that. Is it one of the existing people, a new person, both? I think as Secretary Becker said, I think the financial manager may be able to do some of those things. And I don't think we should get too far ahead of ourselves. I don't think that committee members are going to go into the city of West Haven and start asking for documents and going through it. I don't, to your point, Kim, I don't think that's appropriate at all, or for us to, I think there's got to be a clear delineation of duties. I just see us as really asking some questions based on our existing knowledge.
And let me just add, if we need to supplement the existing scope of services in order to assist the responses, the process of gathering the information in response to those questions, then we should have some agreement that we need those resources. Those resources should be made available for that purpose. And that work can be done concurrently with the other reviews.
Okay. So we'll hear from the subcommittee at some point as to resources that they recommend the board engage beyond what we've done with Whittlesey and this financial manager. Other questions or comments on this section? Ms.
While we're
Kennison?
on that topic about
Sure.
resources, I just would like to bring to this board's attention that since June 30th, we no longer have Mike Malone to assist with the statement of work that he had been working on and completing. And I have to tell you that his focus and work that he had already worked on, some of the administration that is here, the new administration, isn't aware of the work that he had done. And I do want this board to be aware, as Secretary, I mentioned it to you a bit, that there is a gap where we did have somebody on board pulling documents and getting them to us. And now it is a larger struggle for OPM staff to be able to get materials. And it was advantageous to have him helping us in that area. So I just want to bring that to everyone's attention, that we do have a lack of need there.
I think that anyone wants to overtax already overtaxed people, and I think that's appropriate. I don't want to see the inquiry stall because there's so much on your plate that you can't get to it. So I think we have to have a conversation about that. And just because we say these things need to be done, I don't think that the follow-up is, well, you guys go do them. I'm well concerned about that, and I think we just ought to get it out in the open and then deal with it, because that's not fair to do.
Shall I move on to the next item then? Someone's mic on? Let's review and discussion possible action on MARB policies and procedures. We have a draft set of policies and procedures which we have reviewed at previous meetings and provided feedback to staff. Staff has attempted, I think, to revise that to reflect suggestions made. Do you want to give us a summary of the changes we've made, Julian, where we are with these MARB policies and procedures?
Sure thing. I did include a summary of the changes in the meeting materials, in addition to the marked up version of the policies and procedures. And so I will just take these in the order that they appear in the policies and procedures. The first one has to do with section 4B concerning the approval of city debt. And this is really a correction. The statute gives the MARB authority to approve the authorization of bonds, and the way that it had been written in the policies and procedures was on the issuance. And so we made a correction for that disconnect there. And then just as a footnote to that, there are certain bonds for which the issuance is also approved by the board, and that's in cases where the city is issuing debt that's backed by the Special Capital Reserve Fund of the state, or in instances where the city is using authorization in the MARB statute to issue refunding bonds that don't meet certain criteria. In those instances, it would not only be the authorization of the debt, but it would also be approval from the MARB for the issuance of the debt, because those are instances in which the MARB would want to be involved in the structuring of the issuance. The next revision was to section 4D, and this was a suggestion that we just include a template as an appendix regarding collective bargaining agreements, so that we get some uniformity in the way the fiscal impact is depicted. And I think there were even some of the questions today on one or both of the contracts maybe touched on this. So there was a addition within the body of the policies and procedures referencing this Appendix B. And then I did distribute a sample of Appendix B yesterday showing the template. And the main change to, we've been using a template all along. The one sort of significant change to it is to not only depict the cost or the impact, the gross impact of a union contract, but also to provide a comparison relative to what was built into the 5-year plan. So for example, if a contract provides 2% general wage increases, we would get the cost of that 2% increase, but also tell us how does that compare back to the 5-year plan. So you get sort of both lenses to view that contract. And then there were also some suggestions regarding section 4H, which has to do with non-labor contracts. One of the suggestions was to carry forward language from the corresponding section under tier 3 that had to do with conflict of interest in cases where a non-competitive process is used. So that language was carried forward. And then somehow it got dropped from this memo. There was another change, another suggestion and another revision that for some reason didn't make it onto this memo. There was discussion about the change orders and when change orders would require approval from the board. And in the previous version, it set a threshold of a change order that resulted in a 20% increase to the contract value of a previously approved contract would require MARB approval. That seemed too high. And so in the revision, it actually removes any threshold. And essentially it requires it for any contract that has already been approved by the board. A change order of any value would require MARB approval. And then in addition to that, I just note, this was in the previous version as well, that for a contract that was not previously approved by the board because it did not hit the $50,000 threshold, that once cumulative change orders result in a contract value that does hit the threshold, at that point, those change orders and the contract would require MARB approval. So those are the revisions we've made.
Can I ask a question on that last point? I wonder, do we think the statute that says we have to approve contracts more than 50, that's a reasonable interpretation, that change orders building past 50 as opposed to a contract in the first instance was worth less than 50? This is our we're saying this is our interpretation. The statute says we should approve that as well.
Yes, and just to further clarity, that the statute's permissive, so the statute doesn't require that the MARB approve these. It gives MARB the ability to require that they be approved.
Okay. Mr. White.
Just a couple quick things. First of all, I think the appendices are terrific. I think it lays out a lot of experience that we've had and is the standardized procedures people have. I think that's really good. Just in terms of, I think we have to be careful what we wish for. These non-labor contracts, I think that, we had a conversation there and I think the notion was we really ought to look at them all. I think maybe it's in our discretion or something where we can kind of, if we're going to do $5,000 change orders, I'm going to zoom in, man. I just get bored. I think we ought to just pour it down that there's other things, we've discussed the sublime to the ridiculous kind of here, and I'd like to keep the conversation on the heavier things. So, weasel language that we can kind of do what we want, but we don't have to.
That's where we're at.
Because, if we have to look at, either that or I don't want to look at it and just say it's going to be approved if you don't do anything. I don't want to hold anything up, but I also don't, someone sends me something, I'm going to read it. Damn. But,
what do you think about that?
I don't know. I don't know how that would work in practice if it's.
It isn't we can do what we want, but we don't
basis.
have to redundant. If you don't want to, then don't. All right. Mr. Brockman?
I think the important piece is that we do want the burden to be on the town to provide the information. Whether or not this board chooses to take action to approve each of the, right, we spent a lot of time today talking about 2 architectural services contracts, one is $60,000. That was the board's choice. I think what matters to this board, and I think what the complaint or the concern that we've heard talked a lot about, is having that stick to be able to request the information. And the approval, the required approval, is that stick. Whether or not this board wants to at some point in the future remove that stick or defer that to the financial manager, I think we should get to that point when we want to. I do have a personal concern over delaying non-labor contracts like architectural services that are $60,000 and whether or not that is the best interest of the town, the taxpayer, and the board. But I think we should keep the stick.
Mr. Egan?
Yeah, I agree. And we can, once we get a financial manager in place, defer some of our authority to that manager for approvals under the statute, I believe. But I think at this point in time, it's good to, have things before us, and whether we choose to get into the weeds about all of them, that'll be something that we take up at the appropriate time.
that's fair enough. I'm persuaded.
Other questions, comments about the draft set of policies and procedures? Are we ready to take a vote on them, to adopt them? Getting some nods.
So moved.
Second. Signo moves, Mr. Brockman seconds. Any further discussion? Mr. White? Yeah. All right. Mr. Hamilton, your mic's on. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Any abstentions? Motion carries. We've adopted some policies and procedures.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. We have some the open items table that I referred to earlier is something we've compiled that refers to documents or information we've asked for from the city. We've provided the city with the latest open items chart. Their responses to date have been included in the meeting materials. We're going to maintain and update this list on an ongoing basis after all the subcommittee and board meetings, and I'll write more letters as needed, but that's the chart today. Hopefully that will deal with that issue. That was in response to I think, a subcommittee meeting this past month, and there was some public discussion about that and responsiveness of the city. So if we reduce these things to writing, then we all have a record and we all know what's out there. Mr. Hamilton.
Yeah, there was one item here I just wanted to draw attention to for later follow-up, and that is on the Moody's credit report that was included as backup. And it triggered something I recalled thinking about after looking at the June 30th unaudited financials after the last meeting. And that is, if you notice on the Moody's credit report, under credit challenges, the first item listed is the deficit in the internal service funds. And I don't think we've focused much on that, but I think in West Haven's case, I think it's important that we do, that the internal service fund is used in West Haven primarily to account for insurance, and much of their insurance is self-insured. And it has a deficit, if I recall, of about $7 to $8 million. And that's not new. They've had a deficit in their internal service fund for probably 15 or 20 years. But it really has become essentially a way for West Haven, whether purposely or not, to conceal really their true financial position, frankly, because they were carrying for many years, only, a very small amount of money in the general fund, but then this large deficit in the internal service fund. Now, it's gotten actually a little better over the last year. I think the deficit in the internal service fund has come down, but I think we really, as part of our longer term plan, as in over the next 2 to 3, 4 years, that deficit needs to be funded. And so that ought to be part of what we accomplish during our time with oversight for West Haven, is to put that internal service fund on the list of things that needs to be properly funded, and not just allow this deficit to hang out there, year after year after year.
Ms. Kinnison.
I agree. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. It hasn't fallen off of those financial people's radar. I do think that it should be part of the 5-year plan. Initially, in the first year or two, we did put a lens on that. We kind of backed off with all of the other things that were going on, but I agree it should definitely be part of that 5-year plan and incorporated. And Julian, I think if we recall that the majority of that was, a lot of it was in the workman comp area, correct? And it continued to grow in the workman comp. And I think we had heard that they were bringing on additional staff to help in that workman comp area, in the legal area, and a risk manager to also help in that area. But it still has not helped, to my knowledge.
And I think the fact that it's highlighted in the Moody's report indicates that Moody's is paying attention to that as well. And in fact, the fact that it's listed first as the first highest credit challenge says to me that that's actually, an important issue for Moody's in terms of the bond rating for the city.
Mr. Egan.
I think it might be good also if we could have that broken out into liabilities for workers' comp versus, other general liabilities that you might put aside for your self-insured retentions or things like that with, with your insurance, because I know that's usually what you dump in there, exposure on that item. And just briefly, is the mayor here today?
I'm sorry, she's not here because her husband's in the hospital.
Okay. Did we receive the report on who has and has not, or who has not filled out the ethics form?
That's in that package that you have, that sort of the materials that follow the table. There's a,
I think it was a subsequent email.
oh, was it? I'm sorry. It might have been a separate email. Let me see if I can track it down.
So just real briefly, you know, I got to touch on this. I'll take 3 minutes. I'll make it brief, but I do want to address it since it did come up. You know, the article from a couple weeks back after our subcommittee meeting regarding the ethics forms, and I know it raised certainly the air of some of the members of this board. It certainly did for myself, where the mayor stated in the newspaper that one regarding the ethics forms or a copy or a list of who has not completed them, that that our requests are often not specific enough, and that also you know, it says right now Marv has not asked me. Then she went on to say how, you know, she's the mayor, she has basically better things to do, and she's not the personnel director. So just for the record, and I'd like these 2 documents put into the record for this meeting, which is the June 30th minutes of, I believe it was the subcommittee meeting. If you look at page 2, last paragraph, where I raised the issue of the ethics forms, and specifically where it says, Ms. Shaw said the 10% non-compliance rate among employees is not reassuring, and that the names of those out of compliance should be provided to the MARB. It should be noted in the minutes that Mayor Rossi attended that meeting, and that was a pretty direct question. Also, on August 10th, there was an email from me to Pam Alvino, the personnel director, and copied on it was Julian and Mayor Rossi, and it was in response to records that she provided. And the email reads specifically, thank you for the, Pam, thank you for the attached. I could not locate the forms of the members of the ARPA committee, i.e. Mr. Carney, at all. Did I miss them? Or have they not been completed? Additionally, I asked for a list of all individuals who are required to submit these forms, but have not as of the date of my prior email requesting the same. I would assume this would be easily provided from whatever list is used to track compliance, regards PJE, which is my initials. So I just want that those 2 documents as part of the record in response to really her outrageous statements in the newspaper, and what just seems to be a disregard of the authority of this board, certainly our attention to wanting to get some things resolved. But it was clearly, at least on 2 occasions, in her presence, and then directly asked to the personnel director and copied to her for that list. Thank you.
We can attach those to the minutes of this meeting, since you're referring to them, and the notes will reflect that. Any other points about the open items? We will try to stay on top of these. Mr. Brockman.
2, one quick question and then one sort of update question. For this chart, just so I understand, is status written by the city or status written by OPM?
In the attachment you received, it was as received from the city. So the city prepared that. Going forward, I will update our table to reflect the status based on what's received or communicated to us.
Got it.
But in this case, I just took what was given and passed it along.
Okay. And then because this is an issue that I've talked about a bunch. Item 12 on the consolidation of the pension investment management services for the fire districts. Can somebody explain what that blurb means exactly? Because I feel like there's documents there. I'm not sure, you know. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I met with the chiefs to discuss. They were not unwilling to engage in it. So I asked Julian to provide the last best document so we could start off from the same plane as we restart that conversation.
I think that's an opportunity for savings that is good for the worker, is good for the district. So I'd like to see that happen. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other discussion of the open items list? All right, we will move on to our last town, which isn't here today, Town of Sprague. Based on discussion of the prior meetings, they were advised they didn't have to attend the meetings. Oh, thank you to the city and for coming today, City of West Haven. Town of Sprague was advised they did not need to attend this meeting. If the board has questions about the financial reports, staff can relay those to the town. We've been checking in with the Town of Sprague regarding their FY22 audit. The auditor has been on site once for preliminary work. As of last week, the town was in the process of closing out all of its items under that, and the auditor is expected to be on site for field work next month. questions of the staff concerning Sprague? Town of Sprague. Alrighty then. Anything else you want to say about Sprague, Kim?
I do not. Status quo. They're moving along and definitely working hard to not have to extend their audit and try to get it done by December 31st this year for one of their first times. And they do have a new firm this year. So they have some on-site field work that's going to happen in November, and they're closing out the year-end books and getting their work papers all ready for the auditors now. So this is all good news.
Very good. All right. Yes, ma'am. Michelle. There you go. Sprague is in good shape.
Put him at the beginning to set the trend.
No.
We used to do that and let him go, but now we let him go entirely. So
We've actually decided that the agenda is going to stay as it is in this exact order for all of the towns going forward. So that this way we're not moving them around anymore. Hartford will be first, West Haven second, Sprague last. And then this way they'll know when they need to be available.
But Sprague will only come in as needed, if that's okay with the board.
We may switch Sprague around should they have to come on site when we get to present their audit and their budgets.
All right.
I just want to see their change orders.
Any other business under item 7, Mr. Waxenberg?
Yes, I'm still not convinced. I'm going to go back a little, but simple question. I'm not convinced that the use of ARPA funds for salaries of another municipality is appropriate use of the money. Meaning, the ARPA funds can be used to give from municipality to municipality. One municipality can authorize a grant to another municipality of their ARPA funds. In other words, Hartford can give a grant to West Hartford if it chooses to, of its ARPA funds. It does not say anything, at least in my knowledge of the regulations, that Hartford can pay for the salaries of West Hartford's employees. In other words, another municipality takes its ARPA money and pays for the salaries of another municipality. So the question I have for our attorney, I assume we have one assigned to us by the AG's office, maybe. There you go. Is to examine if in fact a municipality can, from its ARPA funds, pay for the salaries and or bonuses, which is a salary, to another municipality's employees. So it may be a technical thing. In other words, if in fact, because the fire districts in West Haven are independent. And by statute, they are defined as a municipality. So what we're being asked to do, if we ever get to that point, which we may not, but the point being, you should know ahead of time, if a municipality can pay the employees of another municipality through its ARPA funds. I don't know if that can be done through the regulations or not. I know that they can give grants, and that's what they're hanging their hat on, but I'm a little confused as to grants versus specific salaries.
Julian, do you understand that question?
Yes.
Let's arrange for Tyler in our Fed Funds section, who's an expert, to talk to Mr. Cayley and see if they can come up with a summary of this for us.
I'll accept a yes or a no. No big 5-page. The usual AT response. It depends. Thank you.
Exactly. Other business, item 7. Any other business? I don't see any other business. There's Mr. Felsinger. You have your
Motion to adjourn.
That's not debatable. We have a second from Mr. Biller. All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Any abstentions? Motion carries. We're adjourned until our next regular meeting. Thank you.